We are going to spend the next couple of weeks looking at culture and multicultural education and what that means. So this is just a short kind of overview of both of those concepts, and then I'll tell you what the assignment is at the end of the video. All right, so culture. Culture is basically it's the set of shared values, beliefs, norms, customs, symbols, language, and practices that guide how people interact, think, and behave. Culture is dynamic and it influences identity, social roles, and also worldviews. And in education, culture refers to the way students' backgrounds, their experiences, their languages, and their perspectives influence learning and engagement. And recognizing those cultural differences helps educators create inclusive, equitable, and responsive classrooms. So culture, it's a whole bunch of things, right, that makes us who we are. So you have your beliefs and your values, what is considered right and wrong to you, what is important or meaningful to you, those are your beliefs and values. Your customs and traditions, like your holidays, your rituals, your ceremonies, right? Your language and your communication styles, the art that you are interested in or that you've been exposed to, the music that's important, the literature, food and clothing and tools, and then again, those social norms and behaviors, how people are expected to act in your social circles. So just to kind of give you examples of all these, I was raised in a very devout, conservative, Christian fundamentalist home. And my beliefs and my values and my sense of like what is right and wrong really focused on those Christian values. My customs and traditions, we always celebrated Christmas. I didn't really understand or even know about other holidays that were celebrated. I didn't know much about Hanukkah. I didn't know much about Kwanzaa until I got into classrooms where they brought that in and they taught those things. I grew up speaking English and English only in my household. And the way that we communicated with each other, it was, based out of respect and love and trust. We never really raised our voices in my house. There was not a lot of yelling going on. The art that I was exposed to, not really a whole bunch of art growing up, but I can tell you it was mainly predominantly produced by white musicians, white artists, those kinds of things. And the literature that I grew up reading about was more closely aligned with British literature, the Anglican literature. I didn't really study a lot. I just went to the bookstore and bought my son Aladdin and the Arabian Nights because he's learning about that in school and we're going to read about all those. So I wasn't exposed to that kind of stuff growing up. I grew up in the South, so my food, it was all Southern, it was all home cooked. My clothing, again, very conservative clothing, very basic 90s, 2000s clothing. That kind of thing. And then how people were expected to act, social norms, you always say hi to someone, you always greeted them. And it was very interesting to me. I had a student not too long ago from Iran, and she was like, why don't students stand up when professors walk into the room? That's what's normal in my culture, my beliefs. And I was like, that's just not normal in American culture. In American white culture, we don't do that. So it was very interesting to hear her expectations inside the classroom and how different they were. But you have to take all those things into consideration when we're talking about culture. So an example of bringing culture in your classroom would be classroom participation, storytelling, your communication styles, holiday traditions that reflect cultural values and norms, those kinds of things. And we'll get into more detail about those later on. So culture, it's not just individual, it belongs to a group of people. And it's learned. People aren't born with culture. That's something that you're going to learn. They learn it through family, their community, and then also the education that they're exposed to. And culture is dynamic. It changes over time as people adapt to new environments and influences. And then also it shapes your identity. It shapes how people see themselves and how they relate to others. So kind of think of it as an iceberg, right? And I have one there for you. So things that we can easily see, like holidays. What holidays do you celebrate? That shows us what culture that you're closely aligned with. So if you celebrate, Christmas, That doesn't necessarily mean that you are a Christian and that you believe in Christian values. That just means that you are like, that's a white, traditional American culture, not even necessarily white, just American culture, right? If you celebrate Kwanzaa, you probably have some African roots that go back in your family, and that's why you're celebrating Kwanzaa. If you celebrate, Hanukkah, probably means you have some Jewish roots. If you celebrate the Chinese New Year, that means that you probably have some Chinese roots in your, back in your line, your family, your culture. Art, music, language, clothing, those are all, and food, those are all things that we can see on the surface. We can see the way that you dress. We can hear the language that you speak. We can see the food that you eat. We can listen to the music and see the art that are valued by you. What we can't see, but that makes up who we are and part of our culture, are those values, those beliefs, the worldviews, the social norms, the communication styles, concepts of time, and family roles. All that is below the surface. And those are not really things that you can put your hands on. Those are just values that are taught to us over time. So what does it mean? Like, what is multicultural education? How do we bring in all those different cultures into the classroom, into an educational setting? So this is like multicultural education. It's an approach that promotes the equity, inclusion, and respect for diversity. You don't have to practice Kwanzaa, right? Just like people from Africa, those African American roots, they don't have to practice Christmas if they don't want to. But it's still important that we recognize it and that we respect it. We respect the differences. And so that respect for diversity in schools and learning environments. And it ensures that students of all backgrounds feel valued and feel represented. So it's an approach to teaching and learning that recognizes, respects, and values diversity. And it gives everyone an equal opportunity to learn. When you're going through this, I want you to think of these 5 core dimensions of a multicultural education. The first one is content integration. So that is bringing diverse cultural perspectives, histories, and voices into the curriculum. And the purpose of this content integration is to ensure that students see themselves reflected in what they study and learn about other groups. An example of this would be like including literature from authors of different racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. In an English class, or teaching multiple perspectives on historical events. Hopefully you guys know I'm like a history professor also, along with being an education one. But in my history courses, especially my American history classes, what I try to provide is, of course, the white perspective, the Native perspective, the Hispanic, Latino, Chicano perspective, the female perspective, the Asian perspective, the other minority perspectives that we have. Because it's important to understand what each group brought to that history, brought to that event. So content integration, that's what we teach. The second core value core dimension, is knowledge construction. And this is helping students understand how knowledge is shaped by cultural assumptions, perspectives, and then also power dynamics. And the purpose of this, it encourages critical thinking about who creates knowledge and whose voices are heard. So an example of this would be discussing how U.S. history textbooks might portray events differently depending on whether they are written from a Native American perspective, an African American perspective, or a European American perspective. The third core dimension is prejudice reduction. So what does that mean? That's teaching strategies and activities that help students develop positive attitudes towards people from different backgrounds. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's not valued. So the purpose of this is to challenge those stereotypes and the biases that you may have or that your students may have, and really encourage that respect for diversity. An example of this would be classroom activities that really debunk common cultural stereotypes or that facilitate structured cross-cultural dialogue. The fourth core dimension is equity pedagogy. So this is using teaching methods and practices that support the learning of students from all backgrounds and very diverse backgrounds. And why do we do this? Well, we do this to ensure all students have equal opportunities to succeed by recognizing different learning styles and needs. An example of this would be using bilingual materials, culturally relevant examples in math problems or group projects that value different forms of participation. And our fifth core dimension is empowering school culture. So this means creating a school environment where policies, practices, and norms promote equity and respect for all cultural groups. And the purpose of it is to go beyond the classroom to address school-wide systems that may advantage some groups over others. An example of this would be schools reviewing their disciplinary policies to ensure that they don't disproportionately target certain student groups, or celebrating diverse cultural holidays at the institutional level. So we don't just celebrate Christmas, but we celebrate all holidays throughout the year from all different religions, from all different backgrounds. So keep it in mind, it's what we teach, how knowledge is framed, the attitudes we promote, how we teach, and the overall environment. So how do we bring culture into education? That means making teaching and learning more relevant, more inclusive, and more equitable by acknowledging and valuing the diverse cultural backgrounds of our different students that we have. And here are some key ways that we can do that. Culturally relevant curriculum, including those diverse authors, histories, and perspectives in lesson plans. Teaching multiple viewpoints on historical events. We can also be culturally responsive teaching practices. That means adapt your teaching methods to reflect different learning styles, different languages and experiences. Use examples, metaphors, and case studies that connect with your students. Another way is classroom climate and respective inclusion. Create a space where all students' identities and voices are valued. Establish norms in your classroom or at your job that encourage open dialogue and respectful listening. Number 4, representation in materials and environment. Display diverse images, books, and resources in the classroom. Celebrate cultural events, holidays, and languages in authentic ways in the classroom, at work. Number 5, family and community engagement. Involve families and communities in the learning process. Recognize the cultural knowledge that families bring to education. And finally, equity in policies and practices. Ensure fair discipline policies, grading practices, and support systems. Advocate for institutional changes that reduce bias and create opportunities for all students. An example of this would be like offering bilingual parent-teacher conferences or equitable access to advanced coursework. Right? So we bring culture into education by integrating it into what we teach, how we build those classroom relationships, and how schools operate as institutions. Those of you that are not going into education, you can do this in the workplace too. So I want you to think about ways that you could do this in your workplace, bringing in the diverse cultures that are represented at work. So overall, culture is what people share that makes up their way of life. And a multicultural education is teaching in a way that honors those cultures and includes many cultures, ensuring fairness and respect for all. So your assignment for this week is to watch the video by Dr. James A. Banks, founder of Multicultural Education, and I have the link for you. There's going to be a quiz over that, and then there's also an activity over this PowerPoint and that short video.